get to play here. Alrighty, go ahead and say hello so I can see that it's...
Hello.
Okay.
Hi, Catherine.
Alright, let me get you a little... Turn up the volume a little bit. Go ahead and say hello again.
Hi, Catherine.
Okay, speak up a little louder, project.
Okay, I'll try and project.
There you go, that's it, that's it.
Okay.
Alright, we're good. Okay, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Shining Beautiful podcast series. Or wait a minute, I have to just change that. Hello and welcome to the Shining Beautiful series podcast. I do that every time. Today I have an amazing woman with me, and Anne is a good friend who has known Mikkel since she was in elementary school, and I've known her son Chris since that time. So Anne, I want you to talk a little bit about how you want to introduce yourself, and particularly today, there'll be many more conversations with you, I know, because you have so much knowledge, but talk about housing today, and just give us a brief intro about you and Chris, and how you came to Denver, and what your vision was for Chris when you first started, because I know you had a vision for him.
We did, very definitely. So, so Chris is 35 now, about Mikkel's age, and after the first few years, Chris has autism, and learning different ways to support him, and I guess a lot of it was because his dad at the time worked for the Colorado Department of Education.
Okay.
And that helped us a lot with visioning. Inclusion was a big, kind of the big practice at the time, and informed our vision for him, wanting him to be included in neighborhood schools. And so that's what we did. We were involved with Advocacy Denver at the time. I sat on the inclusion committee, always kind of fostering those ideas, and we had to work really hard to get him included in regular classroom through the years.
I remember we had to do that with Mikkel too, because she was the first nonverbal person that we know of in the Denver Public Schools that was fully included in elementary school. But I think Chris was one of the first kids with autism fully included, wasn't he?
Yes, and we did a big path plan to get him included at Dora Moore, and at the 11th hour the kindergarten teacher just kind of threw up her hands. So the only kindergarten in Denver Public Schools that would take him was Fairview Elementary at 10th and Decatur, in the middle of the so-called projects. And he was in a bilingual kindergarten.
Is that right? So I did not know that.
Yeah, so he got the benefit of some Spanish language. And so he was there until second grade, when the principal there became the principal at Bromwell.
Oh, okay, that's
and
how.
So she was, a champion for kids of all abilities, and allowed Chris to come into the center-based program. But as you know, it was a program for kids with physical disabilities, primarily using wheelchairs, and the school had not seen somebody like Chris there before, and so we did get a lot of pushback from parents.
Yeah. Well, and we got some of that too, and I remember Mikkel doing Odyssey of the Mind, and some of the parents kind of going, what's she doing here?
Yes.
But it was really wonderful, because they began to see how the kids were, the whole purpose of Odyssey of the Mind is to get kids to think differently. And so now they had to problem solve, having Mikkel be part of that. And it ended up being a good experience for everybody. And especially when Mikkel froze up when she was supposed to perform, and they had to cover for her. So that was, I really got a kick out of that they had matured that point.
Yes.
And the parents had too. So when you, my guess is that even in elementary school, you were looking at Chris as an adult, kind of beginning to think, where would he live? What would he do?
Very definitely. And I think, at that time, pretty much the only options were group homes, maybe a few host homes, and that became more the norm as he continued to age. And we knew we didn't want him to be limited to a group home situation where he didn't have control over who his roommates were going to be, what time you went to bed, what TV program you got to watch, what he got to do during the day, all of that. So, we were actually, it's a double-edged sword. My parents both died relatively young, but they put some money aside in a special needs trust, and so we were able to use some of that money to purchase a house in our neighborhood, always with the intent that Chris would live there. He was 14 at the time, and I remember he was like really anxious, about this whole thing and what was going to happen. I'm like, we're not kicking you out today. But there's going to come a time where you're going to want to move out on your own and have your own life. So yeah, it was a rental property, and he had time to familiarize himself with the whole idea.
And it was still in the same neighborhood.
It was still in the same neighborhood, and that to me was the best thing. I mean, not only close to us, but people knew him. It's the neighborhood he grew up in. They knew him in Cherry Creek. They knew him at the grocery store. Just walking around town. Well, and listeners, helps vulnerability.
It does. It's another layer of safety. And for listeners, I think when you're looking at where you're going to choose to help your family member find a place to live, having that social capital and having people know who you are and be able to step in when you're not there, right. They're comfortable with our kids. And Mikkel, she crossed 8th Avenue, but she was pretty much in the same neighborhood. And the grocery store was the important part, and the coffee shops.
Yes.
So when Mikkel was picking her place where she wanted to live, we had certain parameters like that. And it sounds like you kind of did that naturally.
Yes, we did. I mean, that was important to us. And obviously, Chris being 14 didn't have the same kind of control over it. It's on a busy corner, and that, is like, what can we afford in this neighborhood, thinking. Mm-hmm. And I might have done something differently if I had known then what I know now about maintaining that house on a big lot.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he's just still delighted to live there, and
it's a great neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah, it really
and
is.
People just, they can be parked and they see him jumping on his tramp in the backyard. Oh, I saw Chris today, or I get a lot of that from people I run into.
Yeah, no, he's a fixture in the neighborhood. Yeah. He really is. And I think that's important for people to think about. I think when we were both of us looking at housing, we didn't want our kids to move around and have to make new friends and new acquaintances and to learn new routines. We wanted them to come from a place of strength and familiarity.
Right, and be at the mercy of the host home provider or the group home or whatever not working out. Exactly. So it has, very much that level of stability.
Absolutely. So when you began to set up the household, when Chris was ready to move, talk a little bit about what you did to prepare Chris for that transition into living on his own. I mean, that's a little bit of a trick. I mean, we gave Mikkel a couple months where she'd just go over to a newer place and spend a couple hours at a time, and we gradually, spread that out over a couple of months. So it wasn't a quick change. It was more gradual. How did you do it?
Right, and for us it evolved naturally because Chris's dad and I got divorced when he was probably 18, and his dad lived over there.
Oh, okay.
So that's where he moved to, and so not only Chris but all the kids spent time over there with him, and so that really eased the transition. He became familiar with the house and the comings and goings of the neighborhood and all of that.
And he felt safe there.
He did feel safe there.
Yeah, and that's an important. I think, if we want our folks to grow, we have to provide that level of safety where they don't feel too stressed out about the move. And and that's a great way to do that.
Yeah.
So looking at supports, and you've done some things that are kind of unique. You've created your own personal service agency, APASA as it's called, and you have a unique way of providing support and hiring people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. That came about after about 10 years using a typical residential service agency or support agency for those services. But we always would hire and vet, not hire, but interview. Chris would interview, and we'd vet people and then send them to the agency to further do background checks. And it was initially a reversed host home model. So instead of Chris going to live in somebody else's home, caregivers came and lived with him. And for the first few years, we had people that we knew, like his para, his SLS person would come. We learned quickly that it was too big a job for one person, and had to be at least a couple, and 3 people seemed to work better. We finally, after a few, it did seem to be an every year transition. And after going through the people that we knew, we had to branch out into people that we didn't know. And that was really challenging in so many ways, talk about a trust factor. And we're lucky that Chris is so in tuned to people. He does have a good read on people and knows who he wants to spend time with and who he wants to be with. So that was really helpful. But it was pretty much an annual turnover of caregivers. And so after about 10 years of all of these challenges and continuing to hire people, and the tension between, okay, whose house is this? It's Chris's house, but then the people, the caregivers are there, want to treat it as their house, and there would always be this tension, and Chris would eventually lose out on about being about his needs. So I took on the role of becoming a Medicaid approved provider, and that took about 6 months to put that in place, write all my policies and procedures, become enrolled in Medicaid as a provider, getting Colorado Department of Health to pass on us, and created a different model of support because it was too hard for just even 2 people. How do you have needs met? And so I used this model of support with 3 shifts, with one person working 2.5 days, getting paid for 40 hours for those 2.5 days. And they would provide the role of not just the residential provider, but supported community connections, supported and supported employment. So he could move through his days more fluid. He didn't have to go to a day program or have to be out of his house for 6 hours if he was not having a good day. And on the other side, for the team members, they could work 2.5 days, get paid for a 40-hour week, and then go on and be students, have the other time to do students or teach yoga or do whatever. And it worked really well. Everybody's needs were more likely to be met in that situation. And so we've had that for, up until about a year ago. So I think the first 4 years or 3 years were that model. And we had staff longevity too. We had a team member, she worked, I guess it was 4 years, for 4 years. Other people worked for 3 and 2, and that's kind of longevity that you just don't typically see in regular staffing kind of situations.
And especially in a group home or other residential settings, turnover is a huge problem.
Right. So, but a year ago, and Chris, we see this, our kids age and they evolve and they see what their peers are doing, then they want this and that, and Chris is like, you want me to be safe, I want my freedom, and all the challenges that presents, and pushing in a variety of different ways. And the team came to me and said they wanted to go to 24-hour shifts. I was a little concerned about that there wasn't enough time in that time to really do some of the cool things that Chris likes to do if it is being out and about for a full day. But it's met needs of staff really well. I've also had to staff up because of that. So now instead of 3 people, maybe 4 with a backup person, we've got 5, maybe 6 or 7. But it does work well. We work hard to do team meetings quarterly, so everybody's on the same page. Each team member, we see everybody very much as a team member, and working together. They support one another through phone calls. This is going on. Have you seen this? And I think, that's a critical piece too, just providing that level of support to the team members, especially onboarding. We want them to be successful and feel good about coming to work every day. And so I initially at least do a lot of check-in, and so
yeah, you have
that's
to.
where we are.
Yeah,
right.
You have to. I think, we've noticed this with Mikkel. There are days that I don't hardly talk to her, unless I'm providing her some support,
Right.
because she's comfortable enough with her team. But having me as an anchor, it seems to be
Yes.
good for both the team members and for Mikkel, just to know that I'm kind of around.
Yes.
And they appreciate that too, so that they don't have to have all the answers. But that freedom is a big piece of it, and I think our kids want that freedom, we want that freedom, and our team members want a degree of freedom too. So
Right.
but it has to work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that I've learned. If there's one person it doesn't work for, it's not going to work for.
Well, that's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. And the other important thing, I think, is that we have to listen to the input from the team members as well. What they're seeing, and be ready to change up things if it's more likely to meet their needs, as well as as long as it continues to meet Chris's needs. I think we have to be open to having all of those conversations and talk things around. So, because I've got a lot of the answers, I don't always have all of the answers.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, and if you do have the answers, it changes, and so
Totally.
I think that
Totally.
one of the things that I would urge people who are interested in looking at housing and options for their family member with a disability is, you're not going to get it and leave it. It's a changing thing, just like the world is. Your job changes, everything is changing. So going into it knowing that if it doesn't